Lights, camera, action, and we're good to go. Orla, good morning. How are you?
I'm good, Joanne. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. Good morning. Welcome in to anybody listening in, either live or on playback. If you are listening in live and you think you know anyone who might benefit from hearing some of Orla's wisdom this morning, we're going to be chatting about pelvic floor, and well, that'll be the focus of our conversation. Let's see where else we go. But my name's Joanne Callan, holistic therapist and wellbeing coach and host of the 11:11 show with Joanne and Friends. And I'm joined today by Orla, who joined me a couple of weeks ago, and we talked there about pelvic girdle pain. And Orla is from the Powerhouse Pilates, Physio and Pilates. Pilates and video, physio. So thanks a million, Orla. And just for the benefit of anybody maybe who didn't catch our last show, if you want to just give us a little bit of an intro into your background, and then we'll get into the detailed conversation.
I'm Orla Talty. I'm a physiotherapist. I specialise in pelvic health physio. So the patients that I see range from women who are pregnant, right through to essentially women of any age who have issues, for example, with their pelvic floor, or issues with diastasis recti, with pelvic pain, constipation, all of that kind of stuff.
All of that area, all those conversations that I guess women can feel
reluctant.
Just as you were saying, reluctant to kind of do anything about. And just as you were saying the names there, I was thinking these are things that'll mean nothing until you experience them. Things like pelvic girdle pain. I would suspect most people go through their lives with absolutely no idea what that is. And then they, suddenly hit pregnancy, particular stage of pregnancy, and suddenly pelvic girdle pain is very much alive and well and
yes, for some women.
For some women. And again, things like just kind of, I guess, that whole pregnancy journey, really. And I know one of the things that you guys do in your clinic is your mommy MOT, and that's obviously a really, really important part for all women postnatally. And I guess there's a lot of these measures we can become more aware of. I suppose before pregnancy as well. I mean, I guess there's a certain age that women get to, and whether they've had children or not, often the pelvic floor can just start to change, or its strength is deteriorating a little bit.
That's an interesting point, Joanne. I suppose it comes down to our anatomy. I'd want to start off by saying a lot of the time women hardly more than even hear of their pelvic floor or what their pelvic floor muscles are until they're maybe pregnant, and their care providers start telling them, start doing your pelvic floor exercises now, which is really great advice. But what we find sometimes then is that women, because they're not really too sure where the muscles are or how to work them, that how do I exercise them? And what you're saying there, yes, women who've never had kids can still have issues with their pelvic floor. There's actually quite an interesting body of research around young women and girls who are into a lot of sport, and in particular high level sports with the likes of gymnastics, and the incidence of pelvic floor issues in those girls is actually quite high. And so a lot of it can be down to, I suppose as women, because we are designed to have kids, whether we choose to or not, but we are designed to have kids. Our pelvic floor is made to allow a baby to pass through our pelvis, which means there's a little bit more space down there. And it can mean that it sometimes can predispose us to having pelvic floor issues. When you add into that, maybe, for example, for those younger girls, a body that's rapidly changing, growing, hormones starting to fly everywhere, and we add in maybe, lots of high impact exercise or high demands on our body, we couple that with image issues that do crop up at that age. And in a way, it's probably sometimes it comes along with puberty is, a little bit of embarrassment sometimes with all the changes that are happening in our body. And it can predispose kids of that age too. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't exercise, or that you try and keep your young girls away from their football or their camogie or even their gymnastics. It just means that you need to be a wee bit more proactive in how you're educating them about their own pelvic health. And I think, what I would love to see is pelvic health, in its complete form, not just, talking about hormones and periods and that, but in its complete form being discussed in school and right through,
Yeah. And I know that's something that we have touched on in terms of our conversations as well. I would be, very passionate about educating young women in terms of menstrual health.
Yes.
And understanding that. And I mean, that plays such a huge role that perhaps is starting to come into the sports world. I'm seeing more and more awareness of that now. That's possibly also because that's the world that I'm in, so I'm seeing the stuff that is related to that. Very much aware. Not that long ago, actually, I had a conversation with a group of young women and their parents, and I was talking about period pants and reusable pads. And that's something that's very, very common in my world. Like, I know quite a lot of people that use them, and my news feed, which is probably, going to trigger it again if I haven't looked at it or explored a lot of the stuff that obviously we're seeing at the moment is COVID. But, I will regularly see ads for period pants and reusable pads and things like that. And in this room full of, women my age, the majority of them, and I'm going to say there was like 30, hadn't heard of them.
Yeah, and it's
and I think that's very much the world that we're in at the moment. Is that we hear more about things that we're interested in, and there's a whole other world of people out there who perhaps aren't having that. So even some people listening in right now might be thinking, "Oh my, period pants, what are they?" And I will come back to that. I'm going to do a show on that. I guess on menstrual health. But it is something that we are really only beginning to kind of have those conversations around, to break some of the taboos, and actually even to begin to understand the full reaching capacity around menstrual health, and indeed which ticks into the obviously the pelvic floor and our anatomy as a whole. I mean, like, we don't really understand it, particularly as women, I think, because we've quite a complex anatomy that is obviously as you say, designed to have babies, whether obviously there can be fertility issues there for women and for couples as well, that maybe that doesn't that it doesn't feel like that. I think sometimes that can add an issue when we say my body's designed for this, but it's not happening. So that can obviously it's obviously been very aware of that, and it may not even be a choice. It may just be that a woman's life hasn't went that direction, even though she may have, I guess, wanted it to. So very mindful and aware of kind of all of those sides of that picture. But our anatomy on a physical level is, for the most part, kind of coming from that angle that we will birth babies and carry and birth babies.
Yes, it's interesting you said there about the about menstrual health and sport. The vast majority of research around strength training, sports physiology, 80 to 90% of the subjects in those studies are male. So when we look at all the protocols and parameters around strength training, speed, agility, anything like that, none of that, or very very little of that takes into account where a female athlete is, in terms of where she's at in her cycle. Okay. And there's a growing body, and I think it's been such a difficult thing to control for, because in science you have to have your controls and everything, and it's quite a difficult thing to control for. But there's a company called Fitter Woman, FITR Woman, and they've started into a bit of research around that, and they're looking into the different dietary requirements at different times in the cycle, where, for example, you should be focusing on your strength training, and where you should be focusing on doing a little bit of rest, and trying to get that to match in with what we know, from the existing science is, the best thing to do in terms of preparing for example, for events and training, in sport. So that's, I suppose I just wanted to put that in that.
Yeah,
when
that's
it comes to
amazing.
mental,
And that's a
when it
real
comes,
light bulb moment for me because, I mean, sports is not something I'm into like I enjoy being active, but sport is not something that I do at any kind of high, serious level. It has just never particularly resonated with me. And the point that you mentioned there about the research and the science, typically being geared and based on men's bodies, and as we know, women's bodies are forever changing, and we are cyclical. And there'll be elements of the work that I do would be about bringing those energies into the workplace and how we acknowledge our cyclical nature as women. And I think right now, the time that we're in allows to some degree for some of us, and again, it's not a one size fits all, to be more aware of our cyclical nature, because we're not structured to the kind of 9 to 5 Monday to Friday routine. So we can create a new routine based on our cycle, and there's some really interesting resources around that. But that point around kind of 80%, 80 to 90%, that's also actually true for a lot of pharmaceutical medication. A lot of the research, because of the change in women's bodies, it's very difficult to get a control. So a lot of that research is actually done with men, and men and male bodies. And I've seen some stuff recently which has kind of piqued my interest around actually the role of estrogen in COVID-19 and in resilience against it, and how the numbers seem to be playing out more men. And I just saw a report yesterday where some doctors in New York are looking at trial in estrogen as one of the possible solutions, or a way of using estrogen, because women seem to be less affected. So there's a whole science really around our differences. We talk so much, I think, particularly as women who are kind of striving for equality and striving in terms of what makes us the same as men. But I think it's really, really important that we acknowledge what makes us uniquely different. And if we use those strengths, and I love that idea of how that can be brought in to optimize a woman's training program, if she's acknowledging the cyclical nature of where she's at in her diet. So interesting times ahead, I guess, where we can move into all of that space. But that takes us off a little bit in terms of, I guess, the direction that we were going today. But hey, that's what these chats are about. So talk to me about pelvic floor. What do we need to know about it? What do women need to know about it? What do they need to be aware of? What issues can arise? All those kind of things. I'll hand that floor over to you.
Okay, it's probably one of my favorite subjects between that and Pilates. I suppose today, we spoke the last day a lot around antenatal care and pelvic girdle pain. So it probably leads then into the fact that somewhere along the line, baby is going to arrive, and you're then going to be postnatal. And if you think of how women give birth, so either vaginally or via C-section, the pelvic floor goes through a necessary trauma in a way. Either it has been stretched to allow babies to be born through it, or if we're talking about a C-section birth, whilst your pelvic floor doesn't necessarily go through a direct trauma, you lose some of the support, some of the myofascial support for your pelvic floor, because of where the incision is. That comes after pregnancy itself, which is, and I say this to every woman who I speak to is pregnant, it's such a wonderful and beautiful time that we should all, enjoy, but it can be really, really tough. But the weight of baby placenta and fluid by the end of your pregnancy is almost exclusively borne by your pelvic floor. So they're small muscles, they're mighty muscles, but pregnancy itself can have a toll on, the whole myofascial structure that is your pelvic floor. Those muscles, they don't just sit down there and work away on their own. They are, everything in the body is connected, and they work very, very closely with your tummy muscles. through the front, with your deep back muscles through the back. And then if you imagine like a little bit of a canister where your pelvic floor is at the bottom, and at the top is your diaphragm, your main breathing muscle, which is sitting in underneath your ribs. So if you imagine that then, so we've got front, back and sides, we've got this lovely canister. And over the 9-10 months that you have, you know, you've went from essentially preconception, conception, right through to term. And considering the fact that if we're talking about 42 weeks being a normal term, so to speak, there's been a gradual change in that canister. You know, it has started to hold a little bit more weight in terms of the baby. There's been a lot of stretch put on certain structures, most notably or most obviously your tummy. The pelvic floor is taking a little bit more weight. The back muscles are having to carry a lot more weight from in front. And then baby doesn't just grow out, baby also grows up. And again, you know, anyone listening who's been pregnant knows what it's like towards the end of pregnancy when baby decides to either headbutt or give you a kick right in underneath those ribs. Lots of fun. But what's happened then is your diaphragm is pushed way up then in underneath your ribs a little bit. So there's lots of changes in those muscles. And then you give birth. So there's been that gradual change, and then all of a sudden, poof, there's no baby there. Baby's in your arms. And you're going through a whole different hormonal journey then when it comes to your post-natal phase. Whether you are breastfeeding or whether you're bottle feeding, there is an adjustment going on in your body to the fact that you're no longer pregnant. And then there's the biomechanics of it. There's no longer a baby there. So those, you know, if we think of even the organs that are in through there, everything kind of has to reorganize itself and arrange and find another new normal.
Yeah.
And so the pelvic floor is part of that complex, and it's having to find a new normal. Okay, so it has been put under pressure, can we say, by pregnancy. It has been put under pressure by birth, no matter, as I say, which avenue our birth has taken. And it's probably a little bit sore, a little bit bruised if we're talking about vaginal birth. There may be stitches there. As we said, you know, we can still get pelvic floor discomfort after a C-section birth. You have to remember that with a C-section birth, you'll have a catheter for a wee while as well. And so the pelvic floor can then, excuse me, can start to become a little bit of symptomatic. Now, after vaginal birth in the first week or two, it is, you know, women can experience the odd little leak. And that can be just because everything's been quite bruised, quite stretched, and the wee nerve endings have been kind of numbed off a little bit. And so it takes a little bit of while, it takes a wee while for that to recover. But what we're hoping for is that by 6 weeks postnatal, any wee accidental leaks will have stopped. You'll feel that if your bladder is full, that you're able to hold that, you're confident in holding that until you can get yourself to the bathroom. And if that's not the case, then you need to be seeking help. And essentially, whilst you're never too late to seek help, the earlier you seek help, the better. Yeah. Once postnatal, always postnatal. It's not too late if your baby's 18 months, if your baby's 6 years, if your baby's 25 years. There's still plenty that can be done. But if we talk about the pelvic floor then itself, I suppose I've jumped ahead. So if we think about the pelvic floor muscles themselves, they are a group of muscles that live essentially in between your legs. Okay, so if you think of the front of the pelvis, the pubic bone, they attach to it. They attach to your two sitting bones through the side, and they attach to the tailbone at the back. And then they've got other attachments into kind of more ligaments that are sitting a little bit deeper in our pelvis. So they form this, they're essentially, in some countries, it's called your pelvic diaphragm. So if we think of our diaphragm, our main breathing muscle, and then we think of that in below as well. So they form this lovely hammock. And on top of, or should I say, above that rests our bladder, our womb, our vagina, and our bowel. So when we talk about our pelvic organs, those are the main organs that we're talking about. So there's muscle and there's also fascia, which is essentially, just to make it simple, I almost describe it, it's the supportive, almost like cling film that wraps around your muscles, your organs, your tendons, your ligaments, and even interdigitates with your bones. And so that forms a lovely complex which helps to support your pelvic organs. Okay. 70% of the bulk of a female pelvic floor, the bulk of that muscle is actually towards the back, is posterior. And that's really, really important to remember then when it comes to doing your pelvic floor exercises. Because a lot of women imagine that they're stopping the flow of urine. And whilst there's nothing wrong with doing that, you can get more bang for your buck if you think about starting a little bit further back and working forwards.
Okay. Yeah.
A lot of, we think then about the type of muscle. So there's two different types of muscle fibers that we have in our body. We've got fast twitch muscle fibers and slow twitch muscle fibers, and they both have slightly different jobs. The majority of the muscle fibers in our pelvic floor are slow twitch muscle fibers. And the reason being is that we stand and walk upright. So those muscles have a job to do when it comes to holding everything up against gravity. So they have to work a little bit all day, every day. We also have some fast twitch muscle fibers down there. And those muscle fibers are what help the pelvic floor to react really quickly and respond. For example, if we were to cough or if we were to sneeze, if we have to run across the road or jump on the trampoline. Those are the muscle fibers that give us that extra little bit of support then when we need it. So it's important that we address the two ways that our pelvic floor needs to work. And we can do that with some focused training. But we also need to remember again that those muscles, they don't sit down there and work all on their own. They are part of a team. They're integrated into your body, just like your elbow eventually connects to your shoulder and your shoulder eventually connects to your neck. Everything is all kind of mining together through there.
Yeah, that's interesting because I'm not sure if you caught the interview that we did on Monday, but I had Owen Burns, who is a breathing expert.
Yes, I actually really want to watch that because I'm, that comes in a lot into pelvic health, and I'm very,
I mean,
very
Owen is
interested in that.
just an absolute minefield of information in terms of breathing. And, that was one of the conversations that we were having, is that holistic nature of our body, that all of these parts are interconnected. And, you're even saying there, we're talking about breathing here, and that's connected to our pelvic floor area. Yes. There is no segregation within the body, and yet we traditionally separate it out, and we go, well, I'm going to treat this bit, I'm going to treat that bit, I'm going to do a wee bit of this, and that's going to help this, and it's like this all comes together as a jigsaw puzzle. And obviously, as a holistic therapist, that's kind of one of my key passions, is to help people understand the body physically. And whilst I would say that I have a fairly good understanding and knowledge of the body, I'm learning as I'm listening to you there, just about some different areas and how they work. So I guess that's also the importance of having specialists who understand those different parts, and then we bring them together and create this kind of integrated picture. But one of the things, again, and I mean, birth and the only term that I can use to describe it in truth is the miracle of new life, because the process from conception to birth absolutely just totally blows me away and fascinates me all the time.
The mind boggles.
And I think we spend so much time trying to logically understand how things happen, and yet our very existence tells us that you can't. There's no logic. There's logic can be applied, of course. And there's science and there's all of those things. And then there's that piece that we actually need to be okay with accepting, that we will never fully understand, that. And one of the things that I often say to my clients in pregnancy, because there's the 9 months of pregnancy where the baby has formed, a whole new human has formed from 2 cells, which is absolutely just like beyond any kind of logic, really. And then we get to that final stage, and women get very focused on the birth and how the baby's going to be born. And as a society, we focus very much on how the birth's going to happen and what's going to be needed to support the birth and in general. And one of the things that I try to do with my clients is to take them back to trust in their body and trust that they have been perfectly designed for this process. Obviously, again, I'm generalizing, and there may be slight variations in that. And as someone who is a section birth, because of sort of a pelvic bone alignment, then I can totally relate to where we do need support and intervention and things like that. But from empowering women around birth, I would love if we could trust our bodies to birth in the same way as we trust a human to develop. And I think if we can really use that as our base of thinking, then women become much more empowered around their whole birth journey, and also much more empowered in terms of recognizing when things just aren't right, and that's not how it should be. Because I know we touched on that the last day as well, around the reluctance to seek help is because there is an acceptance that after birth women will have bladder control issues, or women will have, there's like this common acceptance that that's just part of it. Oh, you've had your babies and now you need to put up with that. And it's being able to kind of differentiate and know that that isn't okay, and that there is a lot that can be done about that.
There is a lot can be done, and to be honest, I wouldn't have a job if there wasn't something that could be done about that. As I said, especially after vaginal birth, the first couple of weeks you can have a couple of wee leaks that can be an issue, but that should settle. And if it hasn't settled by 6 weeks, then that is a sign that you do need to seek help. Obviously, those issues can be very distressing for any woman. They can be very embarrassing. And you're right in saying it shouldn't be accepted as normal. It shouldn't be a case of, well, look, now I've had a baby, that's just the new normal. And, it happened with my mom, and it happened with my granny, and it happened with my big sister, and it happened with Sadie down the road. So, that just means it's okay. There's a phrase that goes around women's health physio world, and it's that, yes, whilst they're common, it's still not normal. And it is perfectly acceptable, reasonable, and I want to say expected that you seek help for that. As a women's health physio, in terms of, women can be embarrassed by the symptoms, but they can also be very, very embarrassed at the thought of going to speak to anyone about them. They can be put off by the thought of anyone examining them, and by the questions that might be asked. And I always say to women, I've heard it all before.
Yeah.
I will hold space for you, and you can tell me what it is you're comfortable to speak to me about. You don't have to tell me anything that you're not comfortable about when it comes to an examination. Whilst there's always value in having your pelvic floor examined by a pelvic health physiotherapist, it's not, again, an absolute necessity. So that, as you can imagine, is an exam that is all about consent. It doesn't happen unless you're 100% to have it happen. And we go from there. And then that, I think, comes back to empowerment. This is not, being brought into a room and, being asked to have an examination done that you're not comfortable with. This is you choosing to come forward and speak about your issues, choosing whether you wish to have a pelvic exam done, and then choosing what way or what goals that you have and what tack you want your rehab to take to help manage your symptoms. I suppose I want to just talk a little bit about the common symptoms that can happen after having a baby, if that's all right.
Yes, absolutely.
So we've touched a couple of times there on leaks, and leaks can be from the bladder or the bowel. Most commonly from the bladder. We talk about there's in a way kind of two different types of leaks. So we've got the leaks from the bladder that can happen if you laugh, cough, sneeze, for example, if you were exercising, okay? And those leaks are called stress incontinence, because it's essentially when the body is physically under a little bit more stress, and we get that little bit of a leak then. There's also the leaks that can happen when the bladder feels full and we can't get to the bathroom on time. And those leaks are called urge incontinence. So we've got that urge to go to the bathroom. The bladder decides it needs to empty before we're actually ready for it to be emptied. We're not sitting on the loo on time. Okay. But women can have one or a mix of both of those symptoms when it comes to the bladder. When it comes to the back passage, whilst they're less common, it still happens. And again, I discuss this because I don't think it should be a taboo subject. I think anybody who's having these symptoms should know that they can come forward and get help. We can have issues with control of wind, and we can also have issues with control of our bowel movement. And again, that can be unintentional leaks or feeling like we just can't hold on quick, for long enough to get to the bathroom on time. So if you can imagine, any of those symptoms can be very distressing, can be embarrassing, but they can be helped. The vast majority of times they can be, helped, if not eliminated, with pelvic floor physio. They don't mean that you need an operation or any surgery or anything like that. And sometimes it just takes a bit of collaborative thinking, sitting down with, your GP, your physio, your gynecologist, and having a look at what your goals are and where you're going to go from there. We can also experience some pelvic pain, and that might be, similar to the pelvic pain that we've been getting during pregnancy. Or there are other types of pain. So, for example, pain if you've had vaginal birth pain where maybe you've needed some stitches. Pain during intercourse can be quite common. It could be a mix of all of those. And there could also be some symptoms of heaviness, of bulge, of something coming down. And women can experience a mix of all of those. And I'm not saying all of this to put fear into anyone who's pregnant or someone who's thinking of becoming pregnant. What I'm saying is, be aware that, these are the myriad of symptoms that can happen. Be aware that you can get help for them, and be aware that they can improve and disappear in time. Okay, your body does go through a lot of changes through your spell being pregnant, and and I would say, we talk about the 4th trimester, and I know, Joanne, that you would speak about that, but from a physical health point of view, that 4th trimester is so important, and making sure that you give your body the time to heal, that you give yourself the space to rest and recuperate. And when we talk about getting back to exercise, that you take a very sensible, a very graduated approach to that, and you don't look at it as a time to try and quickly lose your baby weight, to bounce back, to get back into those skinny jeans. You look at it from a viewpoint that is the profound respect and love for what your body has achieved, and that you take that love and that respect and you give your body what it needs going forward in terms of nutrition, rest, hydration, and a really, really sensible approach to reaching your exercise goals, whether that's return to running, CrossFit, or essentially just knowing that you trust your body to get onto the trampoline whenever you want to.
Yeah, and I think that's, again, I mean, there's a whole conversation in that, in terms of the pressure for women that they put on themselves, and indeed we collectively hold as a society to, whether it's whether it's a magazine article that's not actually saying you need to, but the sort of subliminal messages implying that you should, or that if you can't, or if you don't, you're a failure, or look
at the celebrity and then bounce back with their exercise DVD, yada yada yada.
There's so much of it is unrealistic for us as women, and and I think that whole world, I mean, absolutely fascinates me, even from my eating psychology background, because often I say, as often say to women, you don't actually have a problem with weight, you perhaps have a problem with body image. And that's a whole other area, and particularly after pregnancy, because we're talking about weight, but it's perhaps that deep respect of their body and their body acceptance. And I think, often we talk about you need to love your body. I think for a lot of us, that's a step really too far. We're running a marathon maybe before we can, but if we can just accept it and have a respect for it, and that might be our starting point to allow us to get to love, because love has so much connotation. It's such a loaded word. It's a difficult place for us to kind of even get our heads around.
It is, and I think probably certain was, I know body positivity is thankfully now starting to get a better foothold. I think in a lot of areas, love your body, it has become a bit of a conditional love for your body. You can love it if you've got a flat tummy. You can love it if you've got your perky boobs. You can love your body as long as you don't have any grey hair, as long as you don't have any wrinkles. As long as you've got that pert bomb and those tone quads, you can love your body. Instead of, you can love your body for what it has given you over the years of your life, whether that's good health, whether that's the ability to run a marathon, whether that's it being, to bear your children, whatever it has been, your body has achieved so much for you. And whilst I do want to pay respect on what we touched on at the start of the show. Sometimes there could be women that are watching us that have went through fertility issues, that have maybe went through pregnancy and infant loss, and they might find that the thought of loving their body because of those issues very, very difficult. But it's important to remember of all of the other things that your body does for you every day, and to approach even those issues from an aspect of kindness and self-love as well.
Yeah, one of the things that I'll often do when I'm doing a talk around those topics is I try to get women to say my body is amazing, and it's it's really difficult for a lot of us, and indeed was for me when I saw amazing as meaning a particular thing, as you say, it's a conditional amazing. And generally when we say my body is amazing, if I was to say that statement, people might go, well, oh yeah, she thinks her body physically is amazing, or how it looks or whatever. But actually what I've really learned is to focus on its functionality as amazing. My body is amazing that it can blink. My body is amazing that right now I'm sitting here, my heart's beating, my body's breathing, I'm digesting breakfast, and all of those things are happening. And I particularly encourage that in terms of confidence for birth during pregnancy with women, that if they can catch themselves, because again, body image can suffer and women's bodies change so much through pregnancy, and they may be thinking, oh, I look in the mirror and I just feel fat and I feel this and I feel, and all of those things that can be difficult for some women. And I kind of try and say, well, could you catch a glimpse in the mirror and go, is it amazing that right now when I look in this mirror, my eyes are going to blink, my mouth's going to move as I talk to myself, and there's so many millions of functions that are going through that allow us to see our body as amazing.
So I was going to say that kind of leads me on a little bit. I mean, we're talking about gratitude for our bodies and how amazing our bodies are, and I suppose this is the 30th of April, but April is C-section Awareness Month. And so I've been putting up one or two posts on the page about that. But I suppose it kind of draws me a little bit towards birth trauma in a way. And when we're talking about, our bodies being amazing, and again, I suppose I think we should touch on that. But a lot of women, as you say, you do a lot of work empowering women and trying to reduce any fears that they have potentially surrounding their birth. I see a lot of women in my clinic who, and it can be for a host of different reasons, have unfortunately suffered a birth trauma. And that can be physical, mental, emotional, or, any type of trauma kind of all coming into one. And for those women, it can be, again, as we said, for from any background or from any experience, it can be quite difficult to say, my body's amazing, because sometimes they feel like they've let themselves down, or they've let their baby down, or and what I hear a lot of is, well, I ate all the right things and I did the exercise and I went to my birth preparation classes and I did it all. I did the right thing. I did it all. I did everything that I was supposed to do, and still, I didn't get the birth that I wanted, or it didn't go to plan. And whether it's I need a pain relief, or versus whether it's I ended up with an instrumental delivery, or I wanted a water birth and I ended up needing an emergency section or something like that. I always say to women, vaginal birth, and I always use the word vaginal birth and C-section birth, they're both normal. babies are born by C-section every day of the week. I'm not reducing the fact that it is a major surgery. My baby was born by a C-section. So I know the crack when it comes to what happens during that surgery and how your body has to recover afterwards. They are both normal. A C-section is a variation of normal. You did not let anybody down. You did not let your body down. You did not let your baby down. Sometimes these things happen, and no one is, no one has a crystal ball, and no one
knows why.
No one can look into the future and say, well, obviously we do what we can to prepare, and that is, that's to be commended. It doesn't mean that you didn't work hard enough. It doesn't mean that you were unlucky. It means that, this happened, and we have to then together figure out how we can get through that to help them out.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's one of the programs that I run is a baby mindful program, and we bring mindfulness into the antenatal journey and postnatally as well. And I have baby mindful starting next week for mums of babies 0 to 6 months. But and part of that is the principles of mindfulness and how they can allow us to, I guess, accept. There's non-judgment, there's no failure, there's acceptance of what was, because it is such a complex process.
That's a journey, though. That
it is, absolutely, yes, it is. It's
a journey for
absolutely. It's a journey for getting into all of that space, and we're all, I guess, on different journeys and different ways. And I think, one of the things, even again with a lot of my clients postnatally, they would talk about how for example, maybe they're feeling postnatal anxiety, they're maybe feeling postnatal depression, and then we have a conversation, and actually what they're feeling is post-traumatic stress. And that's, I guess, a whole other area as well, that women, again, it's about validating those feelings around your birth, because we have that conditioned sort of thing, healthy, physically healthy mommy, physically healthy baby, and everything's grand. That's kind of way more complex than just as simple as that. So and
I think you're right in saying that it can make women feel then that their feelings around their birth are invalid, because, well, look, you're okay, and all that matters is that you have a baby, your baby's healthy. And women are sometimes made to feel like, well, am I not? Does that mean that I'm not grateful? Of course I'm glad that my baby's healthy. Of course I'm glad that we both got through, that exceptionally scary experience, or of the birth or whatever. But that it doesn't mean that whatever emotions or whatever feelings you have around that aren't valid, and that's And
I think the other area is that what can be difficult for me could be very difficult to what was difficult for you, or what challenged me, or what felt traumatic, or that and it could even change, obviously not birth, because it happens in that moment, but it may be just a moment that has shaped a woman's experience. It doesn't actually even need to have been the whole experience.
Yes, it can be a comment. It can be, as you say, it can be one moment. It can be trauma is whatever traumatizes you. It's not what someone tells you is trauma.
It's trauma, yeah. It's how it's validating those feelings. And I think I'm right in saying that we're coming into Maternal Health Month. So we might get back to kind of chatting about some of these topics in, further on. What I will say is, if anybody is watching in and anything that we have mentioned there maybe has brought something up as you've been listening in, there are some fantastic programs ran by Centred Soul. Rosemary and Centred Soul runs some amazing programs as a point of contact there. And certainly you can contact either myself or Orla if you need to discuss or follow up on any of those topics that have kind of come up in and around that. And I think, just to, I guess, summarize it all, is that on all levels, whether we're talking about pelvic floor, whether we're talking about our mental or emotional well-being, there is so much can be done. There is support out there, and we would greatly encourage women to, to reach out and to seek that support, and to not accept, as Orla said, and it's a phrase that I use a lot as well, the idea that what's common is normal, and to also, know that it's also okay to feel all those things that you might be feeling as well. So but it's important to contact the right people, because there's so much can be done and so much support available in lots of different ways.
Can I just finish?
You can, of course,
we talked about the pelvic floor and the muscles and that, but I never actually got to say about how to do a good pelvic floor exercise.
Yeah, absolutely.
Probably very important. So, as I said, the bulk of the pelvic floor muscle is towards the back a little bit. So I always say to women, if you try to imagine that you've got a little bit of wind and you're trying to hold that in, so you're focusing more on your back passage. And you want to try and almost just close that back passage a little bit and lift it up and into the body. So if you imagine yourselves coming forwards and up in a diagonal, you almost imagine that you're pulling it up and in towards your belly button, but on the inside of your belly button. The tension that you feel should be in your pelvic floor. So it should be around your back passage, your vagina, your front passage, more than feeling that you're pulling in your tummy. In fact, probably best to speak to this to someone one-on-one, but you really don't want to be pulling in that tummy when you're doing a pelvic floor exercise. So if anyone's watching, you're going to do a pelvic floor exercise now. You're going to take a nice big deep breath in. And as you breathe out, you're going to close your back passage, lift it up and into the body as if it's an airplane taking off towards the inside of that belly button. And then as you breathe in again, you're going to relax and let that airplane come right back down onto the runway. Okay. So it's good to get into the habit of exhaling when you do a pelvic floor exercise, especially if you're early postnatal, because remember, it has that lovely relationship with your diaphragm. So your pelvic floor can lift a little bit better when your diaphragm is pushing up, so that the two move up in the body, whilst trying to get this right with the camera. So whilst your diaphragm is moving up and pushing the air out of your body, your pelvic floor can lift at the same time. Okay, a lot of the time when there's a little bit of weakness or a little bit of disconnect between the brain and body and pelvic floor, women want to hold their breath instead. So even trying to get that pelvic floor exercise on the exhale can be a good place to start.
Okay, excellent. And just to say, are those better, or does it make a difference done standing or sitting? Does that?
It depends on how aware you are of your pelvic floor. Again, sometimes very early postnatal, I would say try them lying down, take gravity out of the picture. Okay. Once you've got a good idea of, that you can feel those pelvic floor muscles, not only just switching on it, but you can feel them relax again, because that's just as important. You can then come up into sitting, and in sitting, you've got a little bit of perineal support from the chair and underneath you, so you can try them there. Standing, if you imagine, is a little bit more difficult to gain. You've got gravity's got a little bit more to do with it, and you've got less perineal support. And then from there, once you get the hang of them in standing, for example, then we add in a little bit of movement. So this is where we talk about that nice kind of graduated response and starting to build the pelvic floor back into the body. For example, what happens when we squat, what happens when we lunge, what happens when we start to lift a weight, what happens when our arms come up over our head, what happens when we start to do combined movements of all of those things together. And that's, I suppose, what we do with our mummy MOT after we've done your assessment. We've seen where you're at now, we've seen where you want to go in terms of your goals, and we figure out, well then, right, what sort of a program can we put together to get you there? And so we use, obviously, as physios, we use evidence-based practice. We use they're published last year, the new return to running guidelines postnatal. And so, as I said, there's always research coming out, so we try and keep up to date with that research and apply that then to the women who are coming through our doors. We have our postnatal Pilates classes, which are at the minute running online. We've got our antenatal Pilates classes running online as well, and our mat work for anyone who wants a Pilates workout who isn't either pregnant or early postnatal.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. Orla, thank you so much for your time today. And as I said, we'll pick another topic in the next few weeks maybe and get you back on for another chat again. It's been great.
The next the menopause.
Yes, menopause, absolutely. And I guess, as we're talking about pelvic floor there, I know a lot of women who, have suffered the negative effects of mesh treatments and things like that as well. So that might be something that can tie into that too. So we'll get those conversations happening sooner rather than later. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you to Destination Uri for hosting. Thank you to everybody for watching in. And if you think that anybody you know can benefit from listening in on our chat on maybe a couple of the different topics that we touched on, give it a share and spread the word as well. I'll be back on, what are we on? Thursday. I've forgotten the days of the week. I think that's pretty normal at this stage. I will be back on Monday, and I will be having a conversation a little bit more around menstrual health as well. So that'll be one perhaps to watch in and tune if anything that we were talking about earlier resonated with anyone. So thanks a million, Orla, and I'll chat to you soon.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.